Blurred Lines, The Stunning Case of Travis Rudolph, True Crime 2023. The night it all changed. Travis Rudolph was a name once synonymous with promise and talent. An NFL hopeful, he had a career many young men dreamed of. With his quick feet and natural talent, his future seemed set on a smooth path to stardom. But everything changed on a warm Florida night in April 2023. That night blurred the lines between self-defense and murder, leaving the nation stunned. The call came in just after midnight. A frantic voice on the other end of the line screamed about shots fired. When the police arrived, they were greeted by a chilling sight. Several shell casings littered the ground outside Travis's suburban home, and in the dim light, officers could see the body of a young man, barely moving. Neighbors whispered among themselves, shaken and confused. How had it come to this? That night was just the beginning of a case that would throw Travis Rudolph's life into a downward spiral, one that would captivate the media and cast a shadow over his once bright future. Hours before the gunfire, Travis had been living the life he'd always dreamed of. Celebrated as a hero on the football field, his face was plastered across sports channels and social media. He was no stranger to attention and had always handled the fame well, until that fateful evening. It was around 9 p.m. when his girlfriend, Dominique, stormed into his home after an argument they had over a phone call. Dominique's temper was as fiery as her passion, and when she believed Travis was being unfaithful, she didn't hesitate to confront him. Her accusations were sharp, venomous, filled with anger and jealousy. Travis, who had heard the complaints before, tried to calm her down, but Dominique wasn't having it this time. "You think I don't know what you're up to, Travis? You think I'm stupid?" she shouted, her voice trembling with fury. Travis tried to reason with her, insisting that nothing was going on, but the fire in her eyes burned hotter with every word. She stormed out of the house and slammed the door behind her. It wasn't long before she made a call that would set in motion a series of events no one could stop. Back in her car, Dominique's hands shook as she texted someone. She couldn't believe how betrayed she felt, hurt, angry, and ready to take action. Minutes later, 4 men arrived outside Travis's house, their intentions far from peaceful. They were Dominique's friends, coming to confront the man who had wronged her. Fueled by alcohol and emotions, the situation quickly escalated into chaos. The clock struck midnight as Travis heard banging on the door, followed by shouting. Through the windows, he saw shadows moving, their voices rising in the night air. The tension was palpable, the kind that thickened the air and made every second stretch into eternity. What happened next would change everything. When threats become reality. Travis peered through the window blinds, his heart pounding in his chest. His world, once filled with glory and promise, had shifted into something darker, something more dangerous. The shadows outside moved closer, accompanied by a chorus of angry voices. "Come out, Travis," one of the men shouted, his voice rough and edged with menace. Dominique's text message had worked its magic, summoning these men like soldiers ready for battle. But what they didn't know was that Travis was prepared to defend himself. His mind raced as he debated his next move. He could see the hostility outside, the anger in the men's faces, and the coldness in their eyes. In that moment, Travis felt a pang of fear, one he hadn't felt before, not even on the football field facing down a defense. This was different. This was real life, and the stakes were infinitely higher. There were 4 of them, armed with fists and fury, and they weren't here to talk. He knew what could happen if he stepped outside. He'd seen enough fights escalate beyond reason. He tried calling Dominique, desperate to de-escalate the situation, but she didn't pick up. One of the men kicked the front door hard enough to rattle the windows. They weren't going to stop until they had him. Travis grabbed his phone and dialed 911, his voice shaking as he explained the situation to the dispatcher. But even as he spoke, the tension grew unbearable. "They're at my house. They're trying to break in. Please hurry," Travis pleaded into the phone. He set the phone down and turned toward the cabinet, where he kept a legally registered firearm. He hadn't wanted to use it, but the fear of what the men outside could do pushed him to it. With the gun now in his hand, the weight of it felt unfamiliar, dangerous even. This wasn't football. This was life or death. Seconds later, the sound of glass shattering echoed through the house as one of the men broke a window near the front door. Travis took a deep breath, feeling the tension coil inside him like a spring ready to snap. His mind raced with conflicting thoughts. Was this really happening? Was this how everything would end? He stepped toward the door, his heart hammering in his chest. He didn't want to do this, but he had no choice. The door was kicked again, harder this time, and Travis could hear them shouting at him, cursing his name, threatening him. They weren't going to stop. Then, the door flew open. The men poured into his yard, fists clenched, ready for a fight. Travis stood his ground, gun raised. He tried one last time to shout a warning, but his voice was lost in the chaos. The first shot rang out, cutting through the night like a knife through silence. One of the men collapsed onto the ground, clutching his stomach. Another stumbled backward, realizing too late that they had underestimated Travis's desperation. Blood stained the grass as the other men froze, eyes wide with shock. For a brief moment, time seemed to stop. Lines crossed. The gunshots had shattered not only the silence of the night, but also the boundary between fear and violence, between self-defense and murder. Travis stood frozen, the gun still smoking in his hand, as the remaining men scrambled to get away. One man lay groaning in pain, while another remained deathly still. But Travis couldn't hear anything except the sound of his own rapid breathing. His eyes were locked on the scene before him, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. He had acted on instinct, his fear driving him to a decision that could not be undone. What had he done? The street, now illuminated by blue and red flashing lights, came alive as squad cars swarmed the scene. Travis remained where he stood, the weight of the gun still in his hand as officers moved toward him cautiously, guns drawn. "Drop the weapon," one of them shouted. Travis complied, his body trembling as he lowered the firearm to the ground. Officers rushed in, cuffing his hands behind his back, their voices blending into a blur of commands and questions. He was escorted to a squad car, his mind reeling. The entire confrontation had lasted minutes, but its consequences would last a lifetime. Behind him, EMTs arrived, tending to the injured men. The one lying still was pronounced dead at the scene, and that news spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Travis Rudolph, the football star, had killed a man. As Travis sat in the back of the squad car, Dominique's text message replayed in his mind like a cruel joke. She had sent them to him, igniting the spark that led to this tragedy. The lines between right and wrong, between self-defense and manslaughter, were now hopelessly blurred. And the worst part? The media would make sure the world knew every sordid detail. The media frenzy. The next morning, Travis Rudolph's name was plastered across every major news network. It started small, with local news stations reporting an incident involving the former NFL player, but soon the story had gone national. The narrative, however, was anything but clear. Former football star Travis Rudolph arrested for shooting and killing a man outside his Florida home, read one headline. Travis Rudolph, self-defense or senseless violence? Questioned another. From the back of the police car, Travis could see the swarm of reporters outside the precinct, their cameras flashing like rapid gunfire. Each flash felt like a judgment, 1,000 eyes already deciding his guilt or innocence before a court could even convene. They didn't know him, didn't know what had happened, but they would be the ones telling his story, painting him either as the victim or the villain. Inside the precinct, the questions started immediately. A detective named Jacobs, who had the air of someone who had seen too many of these situations unfold, sat across from Travis in a dimly lit interrogation room. The walls felt like they were closing in, the small space suffocating as the weight of the night's events pressed down on him. "Tell me what happened, Travis," Jacob said, his tone calm but probing. Travis hesitated. He hadn't slept, hadn't eaten, and his mind was racing with conflicting emotions, guilt, fear, and confusion. Could he even explain it? How could he describe the fear that had gripped him, the terror of seeing 4 men charging at him with violence in their eyes? "I didn't want to do it," Travis began, his voice cracking. "I called 911. I told them what was happening, but they didn't get there in time. They broke into my yard. I was scared. I had to defend myself. Jacobs listened without interrupting, his face expressionless, but Travis could see his eyes narrowing slightly, as if he was trying to piece together the events in his head. So, you fired because you feared for your life? Jacobs asked, his pen poised over a notebook. Yes, Travis nodded quickly. I didn't want to shoot anyone. They forced their way in, and I had no choice. The detective leaned back in his chair, tapping the pen against the table. And Dominique? Your girlfriend. She called these guys, didn't she? Travis clenched his jaw at the mention of Dominique. The love they once shared felt so distant now, replaced by betrayal and chaos. He nodded again. She was mad at me. We had an argument and I guess she told him to come over. Jacobs raised an eyebrow, jotting something down. Guessing isn't going to help you, Travis. We need details. If she called them with the intent to cause trouble, we need to know that. I'm telling the truth, Travis insisted, his voice growing more desperate. She called them and they showed up. They were coming after me. What was I supposed to do? Let them beat me? The detective sighed, leaning forward. Look, I get it. It's not clear-cut. But you killed someone, Travis. That's a fact. What we need to figure out is whether it was justified or not. The weight of those words hit Travis hard. He knew the man had died. He had seen the lifeless body lying in his front yard, but hearing it put so plainly, so coldly, sent a shiver down his spine. This wasn't just some altercation anymore. Someone had lost their life, and that was something he could never take back. As Jacobs left the room, Travis sat in silence, the reality of his situation sinking in deeper. Would the world understand? Could they? Or would he be painted as a cold-blooded killer who used his fame to escape responsibility? Outside the precinct, the media continued to spin their own versions of the story. Some painted him as the victim, a man defending his home and his life against a group of aggressors. Others, however, weren't so forgiving. Headlines screamed about a violent athlete who had taken matters into his own hands, branding him a man with a dangerous temper. And then there was Dominique. Dominique's story. The public wanted her side of the story. Was she the instigator? The puppet master pulling the strings, orchestrating the confrontation that ended in bloodshed? Or was she, too, a victim of the night's violence? Reporters camped outside her apartment, desperate for a comment, but Dominique remained silent for days. The police had already questioned her, but she wasn't speaking to the media. Rumors swirled. Had she gone into hiding? Was she trying to escape responsibility for her role in the tragedy? Dominique finally broke her silence a week after the shooting. She appeared on a morning talk show, her face drawn, her eyes rimmed with dark circles. She looked every bit as haunted by the night as Travis. I loved Travis, she said, her voice trembling as she spoke. But we had our issues like any couple. That night I was upset. I said things I shouldn't have said. I made a mistake by calling those guys, but I never wanted anyone to get hurt. Her words hung in the air, a mixture of regret and defense. She was owning up to her role, but it was clear she was trying to distance herself from the violence that followed. Why did you call them? The host asked, her tone gentle but probing. Did you feel threatened by Travis? Dominique shook her head quickly. No, it wasn't like that. We had a fight, just words. I was angry, and I acted out of emotion. I called them to scare him, I guess. I didn't think they would actually show up with the intention to fight. The host nodded sympathetically, but the public wasn't as forgiving. Social media lit up with commentary, some people accusing Dominique of manipulating the situation, of using her influence to incite violence. Others sympathized, painting her as a woman caught in a toxic relationship, acting out in the heat of the moment. But the real question remained, was she telling the truth? Was it just a misguided attempt to scare Travis, or had she known exactly what her friends would do? The detectives were still piecing together the full story, but Travis knew that his fate hung not only on his own actions but on hers as well. Dominique's testimony could either clear his name or bury him under a mountain of legal consequences. And the longer the case dragged on, the more blurred the lines became between who was truly at fault. The Courtroom Showdown. As the trial date neared, the tension surrounding the case only grew. Reporters camped outside the courthouse, broadcasting live updates and interviewing legal experts who speculated on the outcome. Public opinion remained divided. Some people saw Travis as a man who had simply defended himself against an unprovoked attack, while others viewed him as a trigger-happy athlete with a temper. Inside the courthouse, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. Travis sat at the defense table, his once confident demeanor replaced by a haunted, exhausted look. His lawyer, a seasoned defense attorney named Melanie Carson, was prepping him for what would be the most important testimony of his life. "This is it, Travis," she said, her voice steady. "The prosecution is going to try to paint you as the aggressor. We need to make sure the jury sees you as the victim, the man who had no choice but to defend himself. Do you understand?" Travis nodded, though his heart pounded in his chest. He knew the weight of what was coming. His future, everything he had worked for, hung in the balance. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Sarah Mitchell, began her case by painting a picture of Travis as a man prone to violence, using past altercations from his football career as evidence of a dangerous temper. She highlighted his decision to use a firearm, suggesting that it had been an overreaction, that Travis had options other than lethal force. The defense, however, focused on the fear Travis felt, the aggression of the men who had shown up at his home in the middle of the night. They presented the 911 call as evidence that Travis had tried to get help before the situation escalated. But it wasn't until Dominique took the stand that the courtroom truly came alive. Dressed conservatively, her once fiery demeanor subdued, Dominique's testimony would be critical. Dominique took the stand with a palpable sense of dread. The courtroom was silent, every eye focused on her as she approached. The prosecution had prepared her for a tough cross-examination, while the defense hoped she would provide clarity to Travis's case. Under the prosecutor's questioning, Dominique's story was revealed with a blend of regret and justification. She spoke of the argument with Travis, her voice trembling as she recounted the night's events. "I was angry," Dominique began, her eyes darting nervously between the judge and the jury. "I made a mistake by calling my friends. I didn't want anyone to get hurt. I just wanted to make Travis realize how much he hurt me." Her voice broke as she continued. "I thought they would scare him, maybe make him understand that I was serious. I never intended for things to turn violent." The prosecutor probed further, highlighting inconsistencies in her story. "So you admit to calling your friends with the intention of intimidating Travis. Isn't it possible that you underestimated how seriously they would take it?" Dominique nodded, tears welling up. "Yes. I didn't think they'd come prepared for a confrontation. I'm sorry for what happened. I never wanted anyone to get hurt, especially not Travis." Her testimony was emotional, but also left room for doubt. The jury was visibly moved, but the question lingered. Was Dominique's admission enough to exonerate Travis? Or did her actions contribute to the tragedy that unfolded? When it was Melanie Carson's turn to cross-examine Dominique, she took a different approach. She focused on Dominique's state of mind and the circumstances that led to the call. "Dominique, you mentioned that you were upset and made a call in a moment of anger," Melanie began gently. "Could you elaborate on your emotional state at that time? Were you thinking clearly?" Dominique nodded, her voice steadying. "No, I wasn't thinking clearly. I was angry and hurt. I didn't expect my actions to escalate to violence." Melanie pressed on. "And did you ever discuss with Travis the possibility of taking legal or peaceful actions rather than involving your friends?" "No," Dominique admitted. "I was too angry to think about that." Melanie's questioning painted Dominique as someone who acted impulsively rather than maliciously. The defense's goal was to show that Travis's actions, while extreme, were a result of a dangerous and unexpected situation. As Dominique left the stand, the courtroom buzzed with speculation. Travis's case rested heavily on the jury's interpretation of the events. They had to decide if Travis's response was reasonable under the circumstances, or if he had overstepped in his use of force. The trial continued with testimonies from neighbors and forensic experts. Each account added layers of complexity to the case. Neighbors described hearing the commotion and seeing the men outside Travis's house, while forensic evidence confirmed the location and trajectory of the bullets. The verdict. After weeks of testimony, arguments, and emotional appeals, the courtroom was abuzz with anticipation as the jury began deliberations. Travis sat at the defense table, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. He was exhausted, both physically and emotionally, the weight of the trial pressing heavily on him. Outside, reporters speculated endlessly. The media frenzy continued to escalate, with public opinion swinging back and forth like a pendulum. Some supporters rallied for Travis, arguing he had acted in self-defense, while others called for justice for the deceased. Inside the jury room, the debate was intense. Jurors wrestled with the evidence, the testimonies, and their own feelings about the case. They had to determine whether Travis had acted out of self-defense or if his actions were disproportionate. As the days dragged on, Travis's anxiety mounted. The fear of the unknown, the possibility of imprisonment, gnawed at him. Dominique remained silent, her role in the situation overshadowed by the focus on Travis. The verdict would soon be announced, and the outcome was anyone's guess. Finally, the day came. The courtroom was packed, a tense hush falling over the crowd as the jury re-entered. Travis's family sat in the front row, their faces etched with worry. Dominique was there too, her demeanor somber and anxious. The foreperson of the jury stood and addressed the court. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Travis Rudolph, guilty of manslaughter." A collective gasp filled the room. Travis's heart sank as the reality of the verdict hit him. The courtroom erupted into murmurs and whispers, some in shock, others in satisfaction. Travis's family reached out to him, their faces reflecting disbelief and heartbreak. The judge's gavel struck sharply, silencing the courtroom. The defendant will be sentenced in 2 weeks. Court is adjourned. Travis was led out of the courtroom, his steps heavy with the burden of his conviction. The future that once seemed so bright now appeared uncertain, shrouded in legal battles and personal turmoil. The aftermath. In the weeks following the verdict, the media continued to cover the story, but the focus shifted to the impact of the trial on everyone involved. Travis faced sentencing, Dominique dealt with the aftermath of her actions, and the community was left to grapple with the consequences of the night that had changed everything. Travis's sentencing hearing was a somber affair. The judge considered the circumstances of the case, the testimonies, and the emotional toll it had taken on all parties involved. The defense argued for leniency, citing Travis's lack of criminal history and the extraordinary circumstances that led to the shooting. In a statement before sentencing, Travis spoke to the court. "I never intended for anyone to get hurt. I acted out of fear and desperation. I'm sorry for the loss that has occurred and for the pain caused to everyone involved." His words were heartfelt but did little to change the outcome. The judge sentenced Travis to 5 years in prison, a term that reflected the severity of the situation but also considered his intent and the context of his actions. Dominique, meanwhile, faced public scrutiny and legal challenges of her own. While she was not criminally charged, her role in the events and the subsequent fallout weighed heavily on her. She had lost a significant part of her life due to the turmoil caused by that fateful night. The community continued to debate the case, with opinions divided. Some saw Travis as a victim of a tragic misunderstanding, while others viewed him as a man who had crossed a line that should never have been crossed. For Travis, prison was a harsh reality. The world outside had moved on, but inside the walls, he faced a new set of challenges, one where his past actions and the weight of his conviction were constant reminders of the night that had forever altered his life. Epilogue, Reflections, and Repercussions. Years later, Travis Rudolph's story remained a cautionary tale. The blurred lines between self-defense and aggression, between justice and retribution, continued to spark debates and discussions. Travis's case was studied in legal circles, used as an example of how quickly a life can change under the pressures of fear and violence. Travis eventually emerged from prison, his future uncertain, but his resolve strong. He hoped to rebuild his life and make amends for the past, though he knew the scars of the case would remain with him forever. Dominique, too, had moved on, but the memory of that night lingered. She had sought to rebuild her life, far from the media spotlight and public judgment, but the echoes of her actions remained. In the end, the case of Travis Rudolph served as a stark reminder of the consequences of violence, the impact of emotional decisions, and the complex nature of justice. It was a story that blurred the lines between right and wrong, a story that continued to resonate with those who heard it, leaving an indelible mark on all who were touched by it.